Alarion was once a kingdom of abundance, where golden fields stretched toward the horizon, rivers danced through emerald valleys, and orchards bloomed with sweet fruit in every season. The sun was warm but never cruel, the rains frequent but never flooding, and the people, in their comfort, were known far and wide for their generosity. Its cities were clean, its villages vibrant, and its throne, though ancient, ruled with wisdom passed down through generations of just monarchs. But that was a memory now, faint and fading like mist at dawn. 10 years had passed since the sky last wept upon Alarion. The drought came silently, first as an unusually dry season, then 2, then 3. By the 5th year, the rivers were reduced to cracked beds of stone, their fish long perished. By the 7th, the forests were hollow echoes, their trunks twisted and brittle, leaves turned to ash with the lightest touch. Crops failed year after year, soil turned to dust, and the livestock thin to bone. Starvation etched deep lines into the faces of the people. Children learned to walk not on grass, but on scorched earth. With the famine came fear, and with fear came selfishness. Once open hands were now clenched fists. Villages posted guards not to ward off beasts, but neighbors. A man might walk past a starving child rather than share his crust of bread, for mercy had become a luxury few could afford. Kindness, that once common virtue, grew as rare as rain. In the shadow of this decline, whispers began to weave their way through the desperate land. Tales told in hushed tones at fireless hearths spoke of a lost branch of the royal bloodline, a child of the throne hidden away long ago, shielded from palace politics and dangers long forgotten. Some claimed the exile was out of shame, others insisted it was to protect the kingdom from a terrible choice that had once split the royal family. No one knew the full truth, only fragments preserved in stories too old to verify, or too dangerous to speak aloud. Alongside the rumors came the old prophecy, half-remembered and full of mystery. It was said that when the land cried for water and hearts dried of compassion, a test would be given. Not to nobles or generals, not to scholars or priests, but to someone unseen. A trial of the soul, where only a selfless act, offered with no thought of reward, could awaken the old magic slumbering beneath the royal stone. The test would come disguised, they said. The one who passed it would not know they were being tested until the moment was long past. They spoke of the hidden king, though some called it the wandering throne, a figure or force that moved among the common folk unseen, watching, waiting, searching for the one whose heart still remembered the shape of true generosity. When that soul was found, the drought would end, and Alarion would bloom once more. Or so the stories promised. The wind carried the weight of ash and sand as Arya trudged forward, her boots half buried in the cracked, crumbling dirt that once bore grass and flowers. Her cloak, once a deep green like the forests of her childhood, now hung in tatters, sun-bleached and frayed at the edges. The flask at her side clinked lightly against her hip, not from fullness, but because the few drops inside sloshed desperately in the bottom. She hadn't taken a sip in 2 days, and the thirst burned her throat like hot coals. Still, she kept walking. The outskirts of the kingdom had long been abandoned. The noblemen had retreated to walled cities where ration wells were guarded with steel, and the farmers had fled long ago, their homes reduced to hollow skeletons of timber and stone. Only the desperate remained, and Arya was among them, though not out of ignorance or foolish pride, but because she had nowhere else to go. No family, no village, and nothing but a worn satchel, a dull knife, and the stubborn will to live one more day. Her mother had died in the 5th year of the drought. Not from disease or age, but from giving Arya the last of their water. "The world needs your kindness more than it needs my breath," she had whispered with a smile that had no moisture behind it. Her father had disappeared during a riot over bread in the southern markets the year before that. Since then, Arya had wandered, scraping by on roots, moss, and barter when luck allowed. But even luck had grown scarce in Alarion. That morning, she had awakened beneath a withered olive tree, its blackened branches curled like claws toward the colorless sky. She had dreamed of rain, cool, clean water pouring over her skin, her mother laughing in the background, but woke with her tongue dry and cracked, her lips peeling. She held the flask up to the light, saw the glint of the last few drops, and sighed. Not yet, she told herself. Save it for when you really need it. She had heard there might be shelter in a place called Hollow's End, a half-ruined village to the north that scavengers said still had one working well. The path there was long, and the sun overhead was merciless, yet Arya walked. Her hunger gnawed at her belly, but her footsteps did not falter. There was something fierce inside her, a flame kindled not by pride or survival instinct, but a belief that the world was still worth enduring, even saving. As she rounded a bend in the path, she spotted a group of travelers resting in the shadow of a collapsed farmhouse. A man with a bandaged arm, a woman with a baby no older than a year, and 2 children staring blankly into the dust. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken, and clothes no better than rags. The woman saw Arya approaching and sat up quickly, as if ready to protect her family from a threat. Arya raised her hands slowly in peace. "I have no weapon," she said softly. "Only a bit of bread. You can have it." She reached into her satchel and pulled out the last hunk of hard bread, barely a meal, not enough to truly ease anyone's hunger. But without hesitation, she placed it on a flat stone near them and stepped back. The children stared at it with wide eyes, and the woman hesitated only a moment before breaking it in half and giving each piece to the children. "You'll starve," the man said, eyeing her skeptically. "I might," Arya replied with a weary smile, "but you might not." The woman's eyes welled with tears, and she whispered, "Thank you," as if the words had grown foreign from disuse. Arya nodded and moved on, the ache in her stomach deepening. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Helping them had cost her what little food she had, but it had cost her nothing of herself. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her mind, even in a broken world, kindness matters. By midday, the heat was near unbearable. The road shimmered ahead of her, warped like glass in a furnace. Her feet blistered inside her boots, and her head pounded with a dull, unrelenting pressure. She found a half-buried stone bench and sat, pulling the flask from her side. She uncorked it, staring at the last shimmering drops. Her hand trembled. Just a sip, enough to keep moving. But again, she hesitated and corked it. The water might be needed later, or perhaps someone else would need it more. She forced herself to stand and pressed on, even as the horizon wavered in a haze of dust and heat. As the hours crawled by, she passed ruined homes, empty wells, and skeletal remains of animals too weak to find shade. She whispered soft words to herself, stories her mother used to tell, tales of ancient queens who led their people through darkness, of spirits who watched from the stars, of a world that would heal one day, somehow. She didn't know if she believed them, but they gave her enough to keep her moving forward. By late afternoon, the path narrowed between 2 hills, and Arya stumbled. Her knees struck the ground, jarring her bones. She stayed there for a moment, arms braced, shoulders shaking. Not from weakness, but from the weight of everything, hunger, thirst, loneliness. The temptation to lie down and not rise again was strong. But she pushed herself up, breath ragged, sweat stinging her eyes. She looked ahead, and in the distance, past the bend in the path, something shifted. A movement, small, uncertain. A figure, hunched and still, slumped on the roadside. A beggar perhaps, or someone even more lost than she was. She took a step forward, unaware that her test was drawing near. Arya drew closer, wary but curious. The figure was curled in a heap beside the path, so still she feared he might already be dead. His robes, once fine perhaps, were now faded beyond recognition, torn and thick with dust. Wisps of white hair clung to his weathered scalp, and his hands, thin as branches, clutched his sides as if fending off an invisible chill. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then, as her shadow fell across him, his head lifted just slightly, revealing a face deeply lined and darkened by sun and time. "Water," he croaked, his voice like dry reeds rustling in the wind. "Please, just a sip." Arya stood frozen. Her hand went instinctively to her side, fingers brushing against the flask. The familiar weight of it felt heavier now, not because of what it held, but because of what it meant. That flask contained the last of her water. She had planned to stretch it over the day, maybe longer if she rationed it with care. Giving it away meant risking collapse before she reached Hollow's End. It meant trading away her only lifeline for a stranger's comfort. And yet, she knelt beside the man, searching his face. His eyes, dim and sunken, met hers. There was no deceit in them, no threat. Just a terrible, hollow thirst. She looked at his cracked lips, the trembling of his hands. Whatever strength he had once possessed was long gone. He had nothing to offer in return, no hidden pouch of coin, no promise of future aid. He was, in every sense of the word, utterly helpless. Aria's thoughts turned, as they always did, to her mother. How she'd smiled even as she faded, her final words laced with love and conviction. The world needs your kindness more than it needs my breath. Without another word, Arya unhooked the flask from her belt and uncorked it. She stared at the drops inside, barely enough to wet her tongue. Then, slowly, she tilted it toward the beggar's mouth. He drank greedily at first, then stopped himself, coughing slightly. She tilted it again until the last drops were gone, and he sighed, eyes closing as if some enormous burden had been lifted from him. He didn't thank her right away. Instead, he sat back against the stone behind him, breathing deeply, as though tasting life for the first time in days. "You didn't ask for anything," he murmured after a moment. Arya shook her head. "You needed it more." He turned his head toward her, the trace of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not many would give away their last water," he said, "especially not now. Kindness has gone missing from this world." "I don't think it's gone," she said quietly. "Just buried." The beggar chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Buried, yes. But you remembered where to dig." Arya furrowed her brow, unsure what he meant. He leaned closer, and suddenly his gaze sharpened, the dullness lifting for a fleeting moment. "This was no small act," he said. "You've given more than you know." "I just gave you water," she said, a little embarrassed. "That's all I had." "That's exactly what makes it everything." He reached out, placing a hand on her wrist. His grip was still weak, but his touch felt oddly warm, grounding. "You will be repaid, Arya. Not because you asked, but because the world still owes debts to hearts like yours." She blinked. "How do you know my name?" He smiled again, but it was different this time, knowing, secretive. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he pushed himself upright, rising slowly and shakily to his feet. Arya stood too, concerned he might collapse again, but he surprised her by finding balance. "Wait," she said. "Where are you going?" "Where I must," he replied cryptically. "But not alone. You've shared your last drink with me. Now I must share something with you. Come." She hesitated. The road behind her led to Hollow's End, or at least the hope of it. The road ahead, the one the beggar gestured toward, curved into the unknown, disappearing into scorched hills and low, dead trees. "I don't even know your name," she said. "You will," he replied. "In time." It made no sense, and yet she felt no fear. There was something strange about him, not in a threatening way, but in the way the air seemed to still around him, how the light softened just slightly when he moved. She looked down at her empty flask, then back at the man who had once seemed broken beyond help. Somehow, he stood tall now, or at least taller than before. The choice stretched before her like the dry path underfoot. She could walk away, keep chasing a village that may not exist, or she could follow this stranger with no promise of water, no assurance of safety, just a feeling in her chest that this moment meant more than it appeared. Arya drew a breath, wiped the sweat from her brow, and nodded once. "Lead the way." Arya followed the beggar in silence, her curiosity battling fatigue with every step. He moved slowly at first, his limbs still stiff and aged, but as they pressed deeper into the path he had chosen, something about him began to shift. His gait grew steadier. His shoulders, once slumped with the weight of age or suffering, rose. The frailty that had clung to him like a shroud seemed to melt away, subtly but undeniably. She glanced back once at the road she had been on, dry, cracked, endless, and felt a strange certainty settle in her chest. That road no longer held her. Whatever was happening now felt larger than the thirst in her throat or the ache in her limbs. They passed the threshold of the hills, and the land changed. It started subtly, a single green leaf clinging to a low bush where all others were brown and curling. Then, a few steps later, a patch of moss spread over the base of a tree, vibrant and alive. The change deepened as they continued. The parched, dusty trail began to soften underfoot, a thin sheen of moisture clinging to the stones. The air cooled, filled with a scent Arya hadn't known she missed: damp earth, wildflowers, the promise of rain. She stopped and knelt by a small cluster of white blossoms bursting from a crack in the rock. She touched one, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage, but the petal was real, delicate, warm from the sun, alive. She looked up at the beggar, whose back was to her. "This place, it isn't like the rest of the kingdom." "No," he said simply. "This path remembers what the world used to be. Before the drought. Before the forgetting." The forgetting? He didn't explain, just kept walking. But now, the forest around them was unmistakably enchanted. Trees that had once been nothing more than twisted skeletons were budding with green. Vines climbed up their trunks in slow, graceful arcs. Ferns pushed up through the forest floor. The sun, though still high in the sky, felt filtered through a canopy that thickened with every step. Arya reached out and touched the bark of a nearby tree. It was warm and pulsing faintly beneath her palm, as if it breathed. Just beyond it, a low stone stood crookedly, moss-covered and old. As she passed it, she noticed faint symbols carved into its surface, not letters, but flowing shapes and curves that shimmered softly, like light beneath water. She paused. "These marks, they're glowing." The beggar turned to look, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in his face: reverence, or perhaps recognition. "Yes," he said. "They are waking." "Waking?" "This place was sealed long ago," he said. "Hidden away when the world turned cold in spirit and dry in soil. Only the act of true compassion could stir its roots again." Arya stared at the glowing stone. She traced a finger along one of the symbols. It pulsed gently at her touch, not hot, not cold, just aware. "Did I do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The beggar gave a small, knowing smile. "You opened a door. Not with a key, but with your heart." A breeze drifted through the trees, stirring the branches and sending down a slow rain of petals. Arya tilted her face upward, letting one brush her cheek. For a moment, she forgot the thirst in her throat, the empty flask at her side. Something deep inside her stirred, the same part that remembered stories of long-lost kings and forests that breathed magic, a part she had buried under years of hunger and survival. They continued walking, deeper into the enchanted wood. The light grew softer, golden now, as if twilight had crept in early. More symbols appeared, carved on roots, stones, even tree trunks, each one glowing faintly as they passed. The air was different here, thick with an old, slow magic that felt alive and listening. Arya walked beside the beggar now, no longer seeing him as a frail old man. His movements were fluid, his steps purposeful. Though he said little, his presence filled the space around them, not imposing but undeniable. She didn't know where the path led. She didn't know what she had awakened, or what she was walking toward. But for the first time in years, she felt a kind of hope that didn't feel dangerous to hold. A hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't beyond saving. And she would follow that path, wherever it led. The deeper they journeyed into the rejuvenated forest, the more surreal the world around Arya became. The trees whispered secrets in a language the wind could almost understand, and the light filtering through the canopy danced like memories caught in time. The beggar, still silent and composed, led her along winding paths marked with stones and roots engraved with glowing glyphs. As they descended into a narrow ravine choked with ivy and ancient vines, Arya felt something shift in the air, heavier now, more charged. The beggar halted and placed a hand on a twisted tree that seemed to breathe under his palm. "The path tests those who walk it," he said, voice deeper than before. "It must know your heart. And your heart must know itself." Before Arya could reply, the air grew thick with mist, curling around them like fingers. She blinked, and the beggar was gone. Panic surged through her, not from the separation, but from what was suddenly before her. Her surroundings had changed. The forest was gone. She stood now in the remains of her childhood village, blackened by fire, the ground littered with charred wood and broken toys. The sky was a sickly red, as if the sun had bled into the clouds. Screams echoed faintly in the distance. Her heart pounded. She knew this place, this day. It was the day her father never came home. The trial of fear had begun. In the vision, she ran as she had back then, past the well where her mother once drew water, past the alley where her friend Mira used to sell ribbons. But now, every face she passed twisted with accusation. They pointed. Whispered. You let them die. You left. You survived when they didn't. No, Arya gasped, backing away. It wasn't like that. The village blurred and twisted into another memory, her mother's final moments. The woman lay still in a corner of a stone hut, face gaunt, lips cracked, whispering her final blessing. But now the vision was crueler. Her mother's eyes were wide and pleading, and her mouth moved, but no words came. Instead, silence, unbearable and suffocating. Arya dropped to her knees, tears blurring her sight. I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't want to be alone. She clutched her arms around herself, trembling. The forest, the true forest, whispered faintly, the symbols glowing nearby pulsing softly, as if encouraging her. The fear was real, but so was her strength. I'm still here, she said aloud. I carried you with me. I never forgot. As she spoke the truth aloud, the nightmare wavered like smoke. The village faded. The sky lightened. She was back in the forest, the mist receding, the weight lifting. The trial of fear was past. Ahead, the beggar waited at a narrow bridge of stone over a deep, rocky gorge. Arya crossed to him, shaken but upright. Before she could speak, voices broke the calm, harsh, urgent voices from the trees. 3 men stepped into view, ragged and armed. Bandits. Well now, one sneered. Looks like we found ourselves a fine prize. Another pointed at the beggar. Old man's probably got something worth taking. Arya reached for her knife, dull, but still something, but the beggar held up a hand. Let me speak, he said calmly. To her astonishment, he stepped forward and spoke words she didn't understand, a language old and melodic, almost musical. The bandits froze, clearly unsettled. But one lunged anyway, swinging a rusted blade. Arya shouted, raising her knife, but the beggar did not move. He stood still, eyes closed, as if placing trust in the air itself. She had to decide in that instant, intervene or believe. Her instincts screamed at her to attack. But her heart, stirred by something deeper, chose trust. She lowered her blade. At the last second, the attacking bandit faltered, blade slipping from his fingers. He stumbled backward as if struck by an unseen force. The forest around them shuddered slightly, and the bandits, wide-eyed and muttering, turned and fled. Arya stared at the beggar. You could have been killed. He opened his eyes. And yet you chose to trust. Her breath caught, not from anger, but awe. The trial of trust had passed. They continued deeper, the forest narrowing into a canyon where the trees leaned in, casting long shadows over the path. A new sound began to rise, a low rumble, like thunder beneath the earth. The air crackled with something dangerous. Be wary, the beggar murmured. This is the last trial. It will not be gentle. Moments later, the path gave way to a crumbling ledge. Below, a chasm split the forest floor. They edged forward cautiously, but then, a sharp crack. The stone beneath the beggar's foot gave way. He slipped, grabbing the edge with one hand, dangling over the abyss. Without thinking, Arya lunged forward, belly flat against the ledge. Her fingers wrapped around his arm. The strain was immense. His weight pulled at her. The ledge crumbled further. She gritted her teeth, arms shaking. She could let go and save herself. No one would blame her. He was just a beggar. But in her heart, she knew better. She screamed in defiance and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles burned, her feet scrambled for purchase, and her hands tore against the rock, but she held. She pulled. With a final cry, she hauled him over the edge, collapsing beside him, gasping. He rolled over slowly, eyes meeting hers. "Why would you risk your life?" he asked. "Because you matter," she said without hesitation. "Even if you're just a man with no name. I couldn't leave you." A long silence followed. Then, the forest seemed to breathe. A low hum, rising in the roots, the leaves, the very air around them. Symbols lit up in a blaze across the canyon walls. The path behind them shimmered, as if reshaped by their passage. "You've done more than pass the trials," the beggar said, standing now with no trace of injury. "You've proven that even in a world dried by cruelty and fear, the river of compassion still flows." Arya, trembling, rose beside him. And together, they walked forward, to whatever lay beyond. They emerged from the canyon into a wide glade that pulsed with life unlike anything Arya had ever seen. The trees here stood taller, broader, older, their trunks twisted in elegant spirals as if dancing to some ancient rhythm. A stream wound gently through the clearing, its water clear and shimmering like liquid light. Wildflowers bloomed in dense clusters, every color imaginable, petals turning gently toward her as she passed. The air was warm, still, reverent. At the center stood a stone archway half buried in vines, carved with the same glowing runes they had seen throughout the journey. Beyond it lay a set of massive doors, hidden within a tree so large it dwarfed everything around it. They pulsed faintly, as if sensing her presence. Arya turned to the beggar, who was watching her not with the weariness of an old man, but with quiet intensity. The lines on his face remained, but something regal had emerged beneath them, a presence that filled the clearing like sunlight. She stared at him, uncertain, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" He stepped forward slowly, not answering immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand and placed it over his chest. The gesture triggered something, a subtle shimmer rolled over his form like a ripple through water. The tattered cloak remained, but beneath it, his bearing changed. His spine straightened. His face cleared. His eyes brightened, not physically younger, but undeniably noble. "I am Eldrick," he said softly, "last of the guardians of the royal line. The watcher of the old ways. Sworn to protect the blood of the first king, until it returned." Arya blinked, trying to take in what he was saying. Guardian. Then why the disguise? Because prophecy does not answer to titles or appearances. The kingdom needed more than a name or a crown. It needed a heart that had endured suffering and chosen mercy. A soul that gave not from abundance, but from scarcity. The prophecy spoke of a lost heir who would restore not only the throne, but the soul of Alarion itself. She stared at him, reeling. "But, me? I'm no heir. My family was nobody." Eldrick shook his head. "Not nobody. Forgotten. Exiled." He walked to the stream and drew a small vial from the folds of his robe. With great care, he dipped it into the luminous water, then returned to her. "Your ancestor was the younger sibling of the last true king. When the kingdom fractured, the elder took the throne. But the younger's line, your line, was sent away for fear of rebellion. Their names were struck from the records. Their bloodline erased from history, except in whispers." He handed her the vial. The water inside pulsed gently, a soft glow radiating from it. "Only one bearing the royal blood may awaken the Hall of the Heartwood," Eldrick said, gesturing to the massive doors in the living tree. "And only one who has passed the trials with purity may be accepted as its rightful ruler." Arya's breath came fast. Her hands trembled as she looked at the water. I don't know how to be a queen. I was just trying to survive." "That is precisely why you are worthy," he said gently. "You gave your last water to a stranger. You risked your life for one you believed had nothing to give you. You faced your own past and did not run. A true ruler serves first, commands second. And you, without ever knowing your legacy, have done both. She closed her eyes. Faces flashed through her memory, her mother's smile, the villagers she'd helped with scraps, the beggar on the road. None of it had been grand. None of it had been for gain. And yet somehow, it had led her here, to a truth buried for generations, and to a throne she had never imagined claiming. Arya stepped toward the great doors. The symbols on them began to glow brighter as she approached. She felt no fear now, only clarity. She reached out and placed her hand on the bark. At her touch, the runes flared to life, spreading like firelight across the tree's surface. The doors groaned and slowly opened, revealing a chamber carved entirely from living wood, its vaulted ceiling stretching high into the heart of the tree. Golden light filled the space, cascading down from leaves that glowed from within. At the far end stood a raised platform, simple yet radiant, with a carved throne of vines, stone, and silver roots, the royal seat of Alarion. Arya turned back to Eldrick, eyes wide with awe. "You are not just an heir," he said, bowing deeply. "You are the one we waited for." Tears stung her eyes, not from grief now, but from something older, deeper, a recognition of purpose. The forgotten line had returned. And kindness had led her to the throne. The forest path curved inward like a spiral, drawing Arya and Eldrick deeper into the heart of the land. The trees parted in an unnatural silence, as though they bowed in respect to the blood that now walked among them. The glow of the symbols pulsed faster, stronger, in anticipation. Arya felt it more than saw it, something vast and sacred drawing near. Then, with a final step beyond a wall of flowering vines, the world changed. They stood before a vast cliff face shrouded in mist, its surface smooth and featureless, but vibrating softly, like the hush before him. Eldrick raised a hand, fingers outstretched, and whispered in the ancient tongue Arya had heard before. The symbols engraved in the rock sparked to life, rippling out from his palm in concentric circles of light. A rumble answered from deep within the stone. The cliff began to shimmer, the illusion falling away like a dropped veil. Where once was rock now stood a towering gateway of crystal and root, arched high above, as if grown rather than built. Beyond it, the lost capital revealed itself. Arya gasped, her breath caught by wonder. The city opened like a dream carved into a valley of green, terraced gardens burst with color, streams crisscrossed through pathways of silver stone, and luminous orbs of light floated through the air like drifting stars. Towering spires wrapped in flowering vines rose from the earth, their shapes both natural and impossibly crafted. Massive trees wove through buildings as though they had grown in harmony with them, not around them. It was a city alive, breathing with magic and memory. Birdsong echoed overhead. Children laughed in the distance. Water splashed gently in the many fountains that dotted the streets. The drought had not touched this place, not one petal had wilted, not one stream had run dry. This was a world preserved, protected, and hidden away. Arya's legs felt weak. This can't be real. Eldrick smiled softly beside her. It is real. The last sanctuary of Alarion, kept alive by the will of the old magic. Hidden from the world above until the rightful heir could return. As they descended into the city, the people, graceful, ageless beings clothed in robes that shimmered like morning dew, paused in their tasks. One by one, they turned to look, their expressions shifting from curiosity to reverence. Some gasped quietly. Others bowed their heads. A woman carrying a basket of golden fruit dropped it in shock, her eyes filling with tears. "They recognize you," Eldrick said. "Even after generations, the blood speaks." A great plaza lay ahead, a circle of polished stone inscribed with glowing lines that formed a map of the kingdom as it once was. At its center stood a ring of tall figures, not human, but something older. Guardians of bark and bone, their limbs formed of root and stone, faces like carved masks, unmoving. They stirred as Arya stepped onto the circle, heads rising in unison. The tallest stepped forward and lowered itself into a deep bow. "Blood of Elthar," it said, voice echoing like wind through deep canyons. "We have waited long for your return." Arya swallowed hard, every inch of her vibrating with the enormity of the moment. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know this even existed. The guardian rose. Yet you came. The test was not of knowledge, but of heart. And your heart has endured. Behind her, the crowd that had gathered knelt as one, heads bowed in silence. Eldrick stood beside her, hands crossed over his chest, eyes shimmering with pride. Arya turned in place, taking in the impossible city, this living miracle tucked away while the rest of the kingdom crumbled. And yet it had not turned bitter. It had waited. It had believed. A soft wind swept through the plaza, scattering petals at her feet. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered. You are, Eldrick replied. Because you came here not to rule, but to help. That is all the kingdom needs. She took a slow breath and stepped into the center of the circle. The guardians bowed again. The city exhaled, not with relief, but with hope. For the first time in decades, the lost capital opened its heart to the surface once more. And Arya stood at its threshold, ready to become what she had unknowingly been born to be. The heavy doors of the royal throne room creaked open with an ancient groan, revealing a chamber that seemed woven from the very soul of the forest. Light poured through stained glass windows set high above, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on walls of living wood, smooth bark interlaced with veins of silver that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. The air hummed with quiet power, thick with the scent of moss and blooming jasmine, as if the room itself breathed in anticipation. Arya stepped inside, her footsteps soft on the polished floor made of intertwined roots and stones that glimmered underfoot. Every corner of the chamber was alive, vines curled gently around pillars, flowers opened and closed in rhythm with her breathing, and ancient symbols carved deep into the wood glowed faintly, responding to her presence. At the far end of the room stood the throne, not a throne of cold stone or harsh metal, but a living seat crafted from intertwined branches, leaves, and crystalline roots. It shimmered with a light that seemed to come from within, a delicate glow that pulsed like a heartbeat in tune with Arya's own. Eldrick stepped forward, his expression solemn yet warm. This is the Hall of the Heartwood, he said softly. The place where the true ruler of Alarion is chosen by the magic of the land itself. The throne will only accept one whose heart is pure and whose spirit is strong. Arya's heart pounded fiercely. She could feel the weight of history, the eyes of forgotten kings and queens, watching, waiting. With a deep breath, she approached the throne. The air grew thick with energy, a quiet hum rising around her like a song without words. She reached out her hand, trembling, and touched the smooth, living wood. At once, the symbols carved into the throne flared to life, glowing brighter and brighter until the entire chamber was bathed in golden light. From the base of the throne, a sigil formed, an intricate pattern of intertwined vines and stars, pulsing softly in rhythm with Arya's heartbeat. The light wrapped around her fingers, moving up her arm like warm liquid fire. It was a welcome and a challenge, a promise and a test. She felt the magic searching, probing, reaching into the deepest parts of her soul. The room fell silent, save for the pulsing glow. Then, slowly, the sigil lifted from the throne and hovered before her, shining with radiant power. It shimmered and shifted, finally settling into the shape of a crown, delicate, yet unbreakable, woven from the very essence of the forest. Eldrick stepped forward, holding an ancient circlet made of silver leaves and tiny gems that caught the light like stars caught in dew. This crown has waited centuries for the one worthy to wear it, he said with reverence. And you have proven yourself in ways beyond mere bloodline or claim. With great care, he placed the circlet upon Arya's brow. The moment it touched her skin, the chamber pulsed with a final, resounding beat, like the closing of a long-forgotten song. The sigil on the throne faded into a gentle glow, and the vines surrounding it leaned toward her, as if acknowledging her as their rightful queen. Arya closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. It was not just a coronation. It was a rite of passage, a binding of her spirit to the land, a covenant with every root, every leaf, every stream of Alarion. The guardians who had accompanied them stood at the edges of the room, their stone and bark forms solemn but proud. Eldrick bowed low. "Rise, Queen Arya of Alarion," he intoned. May your reign bring life where there was death, hope where there was despair, and kindness where there was fear." As she rose from the throne, a warm breeze swept through the chamber, carrying with it the scent of rain and renewal. Outside, beyond the forest and the hidden city, the land waited, thirsty, scarred, but ready. Arya stepped forward, no longer just a wanderer with a flask of water, but the chosen sovereign of a kingdom reborn. Her journey had led her here, to this sacred moment. And the future of Alarion shone brighter than ever before. As the first light of dawn filtered through the canopy surrounding the lost capital, a subtle shift rippled outward from the Heartwood throne. Arya, now crowned queen of Alarion, stood on the balcony overlooking the verdant city below. The glow from the throne room still lingered within her, a living ember of magic and ancient power, and from her very presence, the land seemed to breathe anew. Beyond the hidden city, the parched earth of Alarion had long been cracked and barren, a land scorched by 10 years of unyielding drought. Villages had withered, rivers had dried to faint memories, and hope had become a fragile whisper carried on hot winds. But now, with Arya's ascension, that whisper began to grow louder. In the days that followed, gentle rains began to fall, not in torrents, but in steady, life-giving drizzles that soaked slowly into the thirsty soil. The streams swelled, shimmering once more beneath clear blue skies, while trees bent their branches in grateful bows to the nourishing drops. It was as if the very magic of the throne pulsed outward, infusing the land with new vitality. At first, many could scarcely believe it. After a decade of despair, the arrival of rain felt like a miracle. Farmers emerged cautiously from their homes, eyes scanning the darkening clouds with a mixture of disbelief and joy. Fields that had lain fallow for years showed signs of awakening, the faintest shoots of green pushing through cracked earth. Arya traveled beyond the lost capital, accompanied by Eldrick and a small retinue of loyal guardians. She visited the outlying villages, walking barefoot on softened soil, greeting the weary faces of her people with kindness and humility. Her heart ached at the sight of their suffering, but she spoke to them with hope and steady resolve. "We will rebuild," she promised, her voice carrying over the crowd gathered in a dried riverbed now beginning to fill with trickling water. "The drought may have tested us, but it will not define us. Together, we will restore Alarion's greatness." Though the rain was a welcome sign, restoration was not immediate. Fields required careful tending, crops needed planting anew, and the scars left by years of hardship would take time to heal. But Arya understood this. Her reign would be marked by patience as much as power. She convened councils not just of nobles and advisors but of common folk, farmers, healers, and artisans, ensuring every voice was heard. Decisions were guided by wisdom and compassion, never by pride or haste. She instituted programs to share resources fairly, distributing food and water to those most in need, especially the poor and hungry who had suffered most deeply. Arya's own journey as a wanderer, carrying a flask nearly empty and giving her last drops to a stranger, shaped her rule. She remembered the hunger in children's eyes, the thirst of travelers on dusty roads, and the loneliness of those forgotten by history. Her leadership was grounded in service. The guardians of the lost capital stood beside her as both protectors and advisors, teaching the people to respect the old magic that now blossomed across the land. Together, they repaired ancient irrigation systems once lost to neglect, restored sacred groves, and rekindled festivals that celebrated the cycles of life and renewal. As the weeks turned into months, Alarion transformed. Villages grew vibrant again, the laughter of children echoed in the streets, and markets brimmed with freshly harvested fruits and grains. Rivers that had once run dry now teemed with fish, and birds returned to the forests in joyous song. Arya walked among her people with quiet pride, never forgetting the journey that had brought her here. Each step was a reminder that the greatest strength of a ruler was not in power or privilege, but in kindness and perseverance. One evening, standing beneath a sky heavy with stars, she reflected on all that had changed. The kingdom that had once been a land of thirst and fear was now alive with hope and possibility. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not just by blood, but by heart. The magic of the throne continued to glow faintly beneath her skin, a constant reminder that she was the guardian not only of a crown but of a promise, to nurture the land and its people with the same care she had shown to a beggar on a lonely road. And so, the kingdom of Alarion began anew, bathed in rain, warmed by the courage of its queen, and forever guided by the light of compassion that had led her to the throne. Years had passed since the day Arya was crowned Queen of Alarion. The drought was now a memory, softened by time but never forgotten. The kingdom had flourished under her rule, fields green and abundant, rivers full and singing. The people thrived, not only because the rains had returned, but because the spirit of kindness that had carried her to the throne had taken root in every heart. Yet, despite her crown and the grandeur of the palace, Arya often found herself drawn away from gilded halls and royal ceremonies. She loved to wander the streets and villages of her kingdom in simple clothing, unnoticed by the crowds, free to breathe in the everyday life of her people. It was in these moments, walking among the farmers in the fields, listening to the laughter of children playing, sharing quiet smiles with the market vendors, that she felt most truly herself. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and rose, Arya walked along a dusty road on the outskirts of a small village. Her cloak was worn, and her hair pulled back simply, disguising the queen beneath a humble guise. The air was warm, and the earth smelled faintly of rain-soaked soil, a comforting scent that spoke of renewal. Ahead, near a well, she saw a young boy no older than 7 or 8. His cheeks were dusty from play, and his eyes bright with curiosity and kindness. He held a small wooden cup filled with water, and before him sat a stranger, a weary traveler, his clothes tattered and his face drawn with fatigue. The boy looked up at the traveler with innocent generosity and offered the cup. "Here," he said softly, "please take this water. It's not much, but it's all I have." Arya stopped, her heart catching. The scene mirrored so perfectly the moment she herself had once lived, a girl with a flask nearly empty, offering the last precious drops to a stranger on a lonely road. It was a gesture so small, yet so powerful, that it had changed everything. The traveler smiled gratefully and accepted the cup. "Thank you, young one. Your kindness will be remembered." Arya's eyes filled with tears she barely noticed. She watched as the boy's simple act of compassion sparked a ripple, a renewed hope passing quietly from one soul to another. As the traveler stood and continued his journey, the boy turned and spotted Arya watching. For a moment, their eyes met, a silent exchange passing between them. The boy nodded shyly, and Arya smiled back, her heart full. She thought then of the chain reaction kindness could create, one small act, given without expectation, that could grow to heal a kingdom, restore a land, and change the fate of generations. Arya continued her walk, feeling the lightness of the moment settle within her like a gentle song. She understood now, more deeply than ever, that her reign was not just about power or magic, but about nurturing those quiet acts of mercy that often went unnoticed. Returning to the palace as twilight deepened, the halls shimmered softly with the glow of enchanted lanterns, and the scent of blooming jasmine filled the air. She passed through the grand corridors with ease, the weight of her crown replaced by the warmth of a heart forever shaped by a single cup of water given in kindness. In the stillness of her chambers, Arya looked out over the kingdom, vast, vibrant, alive, and whispered a silent vow to herself and to her people. To never forget the power of compassion, to lead always with humility, and to honor the journey that had brought her from a struggling wanderer to a queen beloved by all. Her smile lingered, a quiet beacon in the night. For in every act of kindness, no matter how small, the soul of Alarion lived on, forever renewed, forever hopeful, forever free.